Coach Brian again with Northwest Elite Spirit, and this is my review slash personal ideas on a chapter from the book Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda called The Mood of a Warrior. And right when Carlos this time pulls up to Don Juan's house, Don Juan meets him at his car and he says, "We're going to a place of power." It's already noon, so he's like, there's a time frame on this, so we have to get things done. And I think I'm noticing a pattern here with Don Juan setting timetables for Carlos. So like if a person's going to get something done, they have to understand the concept of doing things according to the time that they have to do them. And so they head out, and they hide their car and make their way to this area that's more like mountainish trees and shrubbery than desert, which is what they've been hanging out in. And Don Juan is showing him that this is a place of power. Like where they are sitting is a place of power. And he tells him, like, again, not hocus pocus. He's like, if you come here, you can rearrange your feelings, or you can figure out things that you've been thinking about, basically, right? And I say that's not like hocus pocus or mystical or anything like that, because we all have most of us have places we can think of where we go to get our head straight, right? And we all know, those of us who spend time in nature, that there's some really great spots in nature where you can go sit down or lay down and spend, half a day, 3 days out there and get your head right and work out some things in your mind and in your life. We all know those exist. And so Don Juan is sharing one of those places that he knows of with Carlos. Crow flies over and I guess tells Don Juan that though that's why he took Carlos there, that's not where they needed to be. And so he says, I'm going to he's showing him a place where warriors have been buried. And Carlos thinks it means like cemeteries and things like this, but it's actually like a ritual that warriors would do, where they'd go and they'd make these little almost like cages for themselves. Cages they can easily get in and out of, and be in isolation for a day, 2 days, 3 days, for enlightenment and for power. And Don Juan is going to show Carlos this, and while they're up on the hill, he's pointing out where this place is. It's like a circular rock formation down in the valley below. Carlos can see it, and it's about 100 feet wide, and it's perfectly circular, these boulders. And Don Juan's telling him there's many places like this in the world of Indians. You just have to go look for them. And for instance, maybe a crow might show you the direction one day. And again, that sounds hocus pocus to people, but like if I'm out in the woods, like some of my mushroom finds, like I like to hunt mushrooms, like I've been out in the woods taking photographs just of whatever, birds, chasing birds to take photographs of, and I'll hear some birds off in a direction, and I'll go that direction and find a giant patch of mushrooms. So like it's something like that. Maybe encourages your explorer spirit. And so they go to this place of power, and he tells Carlos, I'm going to bury you, but not for long, because you don't have any power. And they're going to build up to it. And again, it sounds hocus pocus. It's like, what are you talking about? He doesn't have any power. So he builds this cage, and after he builds this cage, it's just out of sticks and dirt and leaves. And Carlos is like, wow, this is a pretty solid cage, and like there's no breeze getting in and no dirt getting in, and his head's poking out the one end, and he can get in and out at will. And he says to Don Juan, what if a mouse or a snake or something could get in? Could it get in and hurt the man? And Don Juan is like, of course not. A warrior is not worried about those things, and so he's untouched by those things. And so this is something I've dealt with like in personal training people, where they're focused on something outside of what the training is. So if this is warrior training, we have to understand that warriors aren't worried about mice and snakes crawling into this thing and hurting them. They're there with a purpose, and they know that they can handle anything that pops up in that arena, right? And so he's pointing, I guess, to the weakness of Carlos. Carlos is a weak man, and he said it throughout the thing. Like he lacks discipline, and he's moody, and he's mean. Like Carlos has admitted all these things, so he's a weak man. And so he's in this cage. He gets in, and he's in there for a little while. And at first, he's like, it's one of the most peaceful things he's experienced, and it's so quiet. And it's too quiet for him, and so he tries to speak, and Don Juan hushes him up. And again, like, just demonstrating, like, he can't even be quiet and let the information or whatever come to him out here, or the personal empowerment. He doesn't have the patience to let it come, and so he has to talk over it. And then he, like, a real quietness sets in, and this quietness starts to bother him, and he becomes like melancholy and like depressed and sad, and he starts saying, "I'm sorry, Don Juan, I can't do this. I'm too weak," and like weeping. Your world is in ways are too strong and too right for me. And Don Juan pulls him out, and he says, "I had to pull you out because this is a task for warriors, and this place might like lash out against you for being so weak." And again, that's not, we don't have to look at that as mystical or magical or anything like that. For instance, like my cousin, he took a guy hunting once that hadn't been hunting and was kind of goofy and like a disrespectful guy, and the guy tripped and stuck a small branch through his nostril, poking up, like pierced his nose with a branch. And it's because he's out in this world where of a hunter, where he doesn't have respect or I guess confidence. When you have confidence in your footwork, it's harder to fall down. And it's just like thinking of things outside of the task at hand as well, like distracted people. Even if you're distracted by your own thoughts, you bring calamity to yourself and to the people around you. And should anything pop up when action is needed, or when boldness or some sort of self-esteem or self-power needs to be there, it's harder to manifest that. And that may be why the area is injurious to weak people. So he pulls him out, and Don Juan's like saying like you feel like a leaf in the wind, huh? And Carlos is like, yeah. He's like, Don Juan, somebody's always doing something to you against your will, huh? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, and there's nothing you can do about it, is there? And Carlos is like, you're right. And at first he thinks Don Juan's being empathetic, but then he notices Don Juan is giggling, like he's got a smile in his eyes. And Don Juan eventually tells him that if you're going to be a warrior, you have to realize that nobody is doing anything to anybody, much less a warrior. And so I think that's really good advice. Like if we're going to have some sort of personal strength, we're not whining about things that are being done to us or the situation we're in, and we're just responsible for our own lot in life. And Don Juan says that to him. He's like, you deserve the lot of men, and there's joy and there's pain and there's all these things that go along with being a man. And Carlos he's not any different, and he's not special. And if he's going to live like a warrior, he's going to have to start taking responsibility, stop whining, stop complaining, and take charge. So then they leave, and Don Juan says the crow showed him this direction, and they go to a swampy place. And Don Juan's like, the only thing that can be done around here is to hunt mountain lions. And so he shows him how to make a trap for little like water rat type animals, and they trap some of those, and they use that to lure a cat, a big cougar. He shows him how to make a cougar trap, but then he has them he sets it up to where the cougar will get scared away before the trap is set. That way the cougar doesn't get hurt, and the water rats don't get hurt. And they lure a cougar in. They rub themselves down with like the grass that's around the swampy area in the mud. to hide their scents, and they hide in nearby trees. Cougar comes along, or mountain lion comes along. Don Juan throws some mud at it before it can snap the trap, and Carlos throws a bundle of stuff at it that misses, but it still scares the cougar away. And Don Juan is telling Carlos, as they're like, Don Juan's like, I'm going to take this trap down and let these guys go so they don't get hurt. And so no cougar comes along and gets hurt as well. And he's making all these hoots and hollers, these noises. And he tells Carlos to imitate him and do the same thing. And Carlos, he says, he tries, but he can't. He can't quite make the noises that Don Juan is making. And then Don Juan says, like, basically, like, look, you need to take this seriously. That cat could come back and get us, basically. And Carlos is like, he says, like, he realizes that there was really a cougar, because when the cougar trap thing happened, it was at dark, and he just saw a silhouette and heard footsteps, and heard like a commotion when the mud hit the cat, and the cat ran away. So he still hadn't been able to admit. And again, Carlos, he's like so many of us. Like, this thing happened to him, and he's still not, like, in reality. Like, this was a mountain lion that he was around, but something within him won't allow him to, like, understand that. And so now he does, though. Don Juan says it can come back and harm us. And Carlos, all of a sudden, he can imitate Don Juan with all those hoots and howls, because now there's some emotion in it and there's some reality in it. It's not pretending. Like, and when we're not pretending, I think this goes for a lot of things. When we're not pretending, there's real power in that. Like, when you're just going along with emotions and pretending, there's no power in that. It's funny that, I have this memory of, so there's these two guys I met. They're both supposed to be medicine men. One lived on the hill. One was staying with him on the hill, but found some people that were living in the woods down below, and he was going down there to help them. And he stayed with them and like hauled water and made structures and things like this for them. But the one on the hill needed somebody to make like regalia. And this person had worked in like a museum. And you say, yeah, right, like you met some guy that worked in a museum and knew how to do this. Like, I watched this guy take apart a bird with just a pocket knife with such precision that it was like getting all the feathers and everything, that I could believe that he worked in some sort of museum, taking apart animals for study and stuff, or whatever they do with animals at museums. What do they call it? Pachydermy or something like that. So anyway, the guy who lived on the medicine man who lived on the bottom of the hill, really with this pocket knife processed this bird in such a pretty, like, it looked like garbage. It looked like there was nothing salvageable, and he for regalia, and he pulled it out in the end, and he was given this rotten piece of bone that it stunk. And I watched him over a week and a half process his bone to make it into like a beautiful flute. And the process of it was all like natural stuff. Like, when he was scrubbing all the bits of sinew and feathers and stuff that were stuck to this bone, he like would wrap it in tall grass and twist the tall grass around it and then shake it through the tall grass to rinse it off and look and, do it again. And he had all these different techniques, like natural techniques for processing this bone. And I watched him like do that and then go back up on the hill with the other medicine man, and there's more like ceremony where they're like acting like they're doing the thing, like they're acting like they're washing the bones. They're pretending that there's any need or emotion behind this, and I think there's power in that. Like the medicine man down the hill, he was so mad about being left with this rotten bone, but then the power to be able to transform that into something in a real way is powerful, in my opinion. So it's like that, right? Like pretending. So like you could see, like in that story where like he was pretending that he saw a cougar, or that a cougar was coming, even though he saw it with his own eyes, he still had to like kind of pretend that it was there and try to, begin making these noises. But then when there was the reality of the cougar, not a pretend cougar, not a ceremonial cougar, but an actual cougar in his mind, he was able to replicate those noises. And then Don Juan says, like, cougars aren't no fools, so we have to, like, skedaddle. We have to get out of here because it'll double back and it'll come after us. And so Don Juan starts taking off, and Carlos is following him. And even in the dark, Carlos is like on him. He's got his hands out like in front of him, like feeling for branches and stuff like that. And he's following Don Juan through the dark. And how is that possible? How can you do that? Well, lately I've been doing a lot of walking around in the dark at like state parks and stuff like that, because it's kind of a safe place, and you're not really like out in the middle of the woods, where you can wander off into oblivion. And so I walk around in the dark quite a bit lately, and you do get better at it, and the more you do it, the more you get better at it. And it's also a matter of perception. Like Don Juan talks about like undoing the world, and the process for undoing the world is to stop using your eyes so much and use your ears. So like once you've been practicing that, you can get better at it. It starts coming natural, and Carlos was likely using his ears a lot more than his eyes, and able to follow Don Juan. And then they get down back to under like the wall that they had come down from to go to that circle, like the place of power that they were looking down on the circle from. And Don Juan basically says for Carlos to hurry because he thinks the cat's coming. And then Carlos hears he says like a mooing, but like a purring moo, and he hustles it up past Don Juan, up to their original spot in the dark, seemingly unable to see. And Don Juan makes it up there, and Carlos thinks Don Juan is like exhausted, but because he's writhing around on the ground, but really he's laughing. So again, the power and the reality of like what you can do when you're not hindered by all those, I guess, worldly thoughts, right? Like those worldly things, like situations like Don Juan is putting Carlos in, it turns off all of that stuff. Like you don't have time to think about like the laundry, or just what so-and-so said about you, or who's doing what on TV, all the weird things we get caught up in worrying about. It's just you're present in the moment, acting of your own volition. And so also at the same time, earlier Don Juan, and I don't think I mentioned this, but he says that a warrior abandons himself but acts in complete control. And Carlos is again being argumentative, and he says, well, how can anybody ever do that? And this climbing up to the top, being chased by a cougar, is exactly how. Like he was completely in control. Obviously he could scramble up in the dark, never lose footing, pass his mentor, and reach the top. But how? Because he was also completely abandoned. Like the cougar was going to get him. He just had to abandon himself to the moment and to the task, and scramble to the top. And it's like, as above, so below. Like this isn't just in case of a cougar. This is like for everything. Like, know that this is real life. Know that, I guess, death is imminent, and like death is coming, and act accordingly. Don't be so scared, and don't pretend. I think that's what's going on right now. So anyway, this has been Coach Brian with Northwest Elite Spirit. This has been my take on The Mood of a Warrior from Journey to Ixtlan by Carlos Castaneda. For access to my suggested library, my blog, Northwest Elite Spirit merchandise, and to sign up to be personally trained by me online, Coach Brian Spears, go to northwestelitespirit.com. I've also recently released 2 books. One is called The ABCs of Strength and Endurance, The Essential Guide to Strength and Endurance, and The ABCs of Recovering from Divorce for Men, which is prompted by me, and each chapter is generated by ChatGPT from my prompts. You can go find those on Amazon.com and on Kindle. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do that now. Thank you.